So, I've been thinking about some of the ways I've been describing how I arrived at almost permanent ideas of uh, foundational narratives that are not necessarily permanent, because as I keep mentioning, with the postmodern approach, the more we revisit these foundational stories, the more we're open to reinterpreting how to kind of almost fix them in our mind, as it were. So it keeps them almost like immovable until we have to revisit them again. So I want to think of it as kind of like rock climbing. So if you ever watch anybody rock climbing, they usually have these certain spikes that they stick into the mountain, and then they almost harness themselves to it until they are able to climb, and then they remove it, and then they keep going. So it's almost, if you think of that analogy, it'll almost help you understand how you almost have to have these firm ways of understanding something, and then plant it in your mind almost, and then don't change it while you learn other things around it, maybe somewhere else in your brain, anywhere in the world. And then before you pull it out, you have to understand what you're going to replace it with and how you're going to change it, and then put a different one in. So in that regard, I've been talking a lot about books and how, from my understanding, when we think about like what is it that we base what we understand on, it's usually the books that we understand to be kind of scripture. So I usually refer to the Torah. I refer to, I mean, I don't really know when that was revealed, other than that it was a little bit before 2000 years ago. And then um, after that, it was the Bible, which was 2000 years ago. And then after that was the Qur'an, which was about 600 years after that. So to think about, like, how do you know that those are the only ones, right? So then I could say, well, because when the prophet was um, around that more than 1,000 years ago, he said that an angel visited him, and he said that I can tell you about faith. So then it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. What is faith? And so the reply was, it's funny actually. I want to tell you the story about how it started, because it's actually narrated as a man who just came upon the prophet when he was or Muhammad when he was sitting with his friends, and nobody recognized him. He looked like he was just like had this kind of fresh look about him, not disheveled, no dust on him. His hair was like clean, and they're just like, okay, we live in a desert. Like, how do you even look like that? And we don't even know who you are. So I mean, like, where'd you come from? So they're thinking about this in their mind. But anyway, he came to the prophet, and he came and he sat down with him, and he said to him, um, tell me about what it means to almost submit to an idea. So before you want to grapple with it in your mind and kind of like figure out, how do I think about this? What is it to mean to just say, yes, I accept it right away? So then the prophet, Muhammad looked at him and was like, I don't, I can't remember what he said. It was almost like akin to like, I don't know, like maybe God and his prophet would know, as though like I'm willing to learn maybe. So then he said it means to believe in oneness, and that you as a prophet need to believe that you are a messenger, and somebody who is a seer. So the difference in some traditions is that sometimes God sends these people with special miracles and with books. And these books usually tell new ways of living. So it's almost like civilization has advanced enough. Now you can actually think about using the ideas from the old book, and this new book you can think about new ways of thinking. So you guys decide for yourself what you want to keep from the old one, what you want to update with the new one. So it's almost like, oh, okay, so I have to believe that about myself. This is the prophet thinking. And he's like, okay. And then he said, and you also need to think about prayer. So ways to remind yourself and remember how you want to remember oneness. And that there are prophets that and people that have extra gifts from God. So he's like, okay. And then he said, and then you have to remember why it's important to be charitable. He's like, all right. And then he said, and then you need to remember why it's important to delay gratification. So to fast. Like, okay, I can do that. And then he said, and then you can visit the house of God. Now, people know this to mean just a place of worship, which is known to be any place where people go when they want to almost retreat for a little bit so that they can remember nature and universe, and almost like ways to remember in a way that if anybody else is there, they know that, oh, this is somebody who has almost the same interests as me, so I can kind of talk with them about it. So all of these things, he's saying, if you remember these as things that I should think about without letting my brain override my heart, then I think I'll be okay. Because remember, we said the heart is actually the smartest thing in our body because it comes from God. And then after that, the brain has to think about, why should I believe my heart? And then it sometimes has to kind of grapple with it. And then after it grapples, it's like, I need to sleep for a little bit and then I'll come back to it. So it's basically saying anything in the universe that you find and your heart resonates with, that's what you should follow, and then find a way for your mind to make sense of it. So then he said, next, this man who was like this newcomer, he says, now, can I tell you about faith? And he's like, yeah. He's like, faith is to believe in God. And he's like, okay, I'm working on that almost. And then he said, and then you have to believe in his angels. And later, we find out about all the different jobs. There's so many angels, and a lot of them have like so many different jobs. It's almost difficult to know all the different angels that exist. And then he said, okay. And then he said, and then you have to believe in his book. So it's almost to say, so I guess there are a certain amount of books. Like we don't know like how many books there are. So they don't say, they just say there's books. So just believe in the books. He's like, okay. And then he said, and to believe that there are prophets that exist. So he's like, these things all come to the heart. So now that we know that you have to almost sometimes pause your brain and think, my heart is thinking, I have to believe in God, angels, books, prophets. And then he said, and then to believe that there are going to be days where you're almost held to account, which means there might be some days that if you do something that might be like kind of a mistake, it's kind of in the gray area, and you're getting signs in the universe that are saying you might be getting in the like the yellow zone, like you might be going to the red zone soon, like which means like slow down and be careful because you might be hurting someone or yourself. Then there might come a time where you're going to actually maybe get in trouble or have to answer as to like, why are you still doing this if it's causing trouble? Some people call this the day of judgment, which means for you any day could be like a day where like maybe you were driving on the highway all the time, the speed limit's 80, and every day you're like 100 is fine, but then one day you were really late and you drove 120 and the cops pulled you over and like, okay, like this is enough, like you have to kind of respect the speed limit, and then you have to pay a ticket, and then maybe work about how do I make sure that I'm maybe give myself enough time so I can arrive to work without having to speed. And then he said, and then you have to believe that we have life and rebirth, so that in some way you have to try to understand that when we die, God is that powerful and the universe is that powerful that we can actually come back to life. Like, okay, I can believe that because I see plants that die and then they come back to life, and we see seasons change. So then he said, and then you have to believe in fate, which means it's kind of like karma, which there are some things that are written in time and you can't change them. Now, if you think about that, you say, at the time, maybe the prophet didn't really understand what that meant, but he understood right now. He's like, I didn't choose to be a prophet with miracles, but here I am. So he's like, okay. and then after that, the angel said, now I want you to ask me what excellence is. He's like, whoa, what's that? And he said, excellence is to believe that you want to be in the world as though God sees you. Sorry, as though you see God. So it's almost like I'm almost like doing my best because I know that God sees me and he's going to help me if I'm stuck, or he wants to make sure that I'm always doing my best work or giving myself a break when I need one. And if you don't see God, know that God sees you. So you don't have to feel like, well, just because I don't see God means he doesn't exist, right? Because it's hard to understand like what kind of imagination do I need to think about God? Because like we said, he already has a lot of different names in the way people think about him. So now all of these things are coming from the heart, and that's why our job now is to think. God's saying, okay, I've given you all the tools. And then after that, the angel left. And we didn't know it was an angel. Sorry, I just told you the answer. So then after that, when he left, the prophet looked at his friends, his companions, and they looked at him. They're like, who was that? He's like, that is an angel that comes to visit me. And he came in the form of a man, because sometimes he comes in the form of a man, and just so that he doesn't scare people. And then he came to teach you a new way. Now he said your way because in the desert it's different than anybody else's way, and we'll see why. Sometimes some places they practice a certain way, and sometimes people like the idea, but they practice it in a little bit of a different way. So when you think about this now, you say, "Oh, that's pretty cool." So first of all, why are angels scary? And then you can think, remember, like they're really, really big and they move really fast. And sometimes it's not that they're scary because they mean to be, it's just that they're light. And because their light can be very, very bright and humans aren't used to thinking about them, if they don't even know that they exist, they might think that's something that's coming to hurt them. So we actually have stories in the Quran which talk about how Ibrahim was visited by an angel and he was scared. David was visited by an angel and he was scared. And these are prophets that are known to be very, very they're very strong in a sense that they have really strong faith in God, but they just don't know like what just came to visit me, right? So it's almost to say, you know, we're glad that we have these stories about Halloween because it's not that these energies are there to scare us, but it's just to show that we should probably be careful about asking to see God because our heart is probably not able to understand how to grasp what that might be like to just humans, right? So now you think back to all this and you think, wow, this is really cool. But I don't understand how to understand the books. And that's a pretty good idea to think about because it's really hard to understand like what would have happened if people didn't think about writing. How would we know what a book is? And I just talked, I think, a video or two about saying, what if we had a blank book and we decided we want to write our own book or write our own app? That is inspiration, right? It's not to say that we're going to say we're a prophet because we don't really have miracles the way the prophets had miracles, but the way that we are thinking and continue to love people, that's like its own miracle. Like you think that like people continue to, get sick and then feel better. That's a miracle. That moms can have babies. That's a miracle, right? That men decide, you know what, I'm used to understanding everything about my tradition that says men should work and women should stay home and raise the babies. But then they say, you know what, if you like your job as a mom, why don't you, continue your job that you had before you became a mom and I'll stay home and raise the kids, right? So all these new ideas that are like really pioneering, they're very encouraging. And to some people be like, whoa, it's really hard to find sometimes people who are able to break tradition, which means think in very new ways that some people might not really be comfortable to think about yet. So when we think about this now, we can think about what fate is, which is to say, some people, they have, like I talked about, people who are literal, like they don't want to change their thinking to abstract thinking. And they might think, well, if fate is fate, like things aren't going to change, then I'm just going to continue to think in a literal way. And you can say, okay, I can see why you would want to think that way, and maybe just leave it at that and just let them kind of understand the universe and just say, well, just try, like ask God to help you see maybe in a literal metaphorical way. And sometimes listening to music will help you because sometimes the words in music, they're always about love, well, mostly are. And when we think about love, you can't really touch love. You can only experience it. You can see it somehow between people, like if you see people hugging, or you see a mom nursing a child, or if you see dad playing with his kids, or like two puppies playing, right? You see that looks like love, but you can't really touch it. You can only witness it. You can feel it. It can make you laugh, right? It can make you smile. So in this way, you understand that, oh, so if I listen to music, it'll help me almost understand like something outside of what's absolutely like literal and concrete. Like it's helping me think in like an imagination. So now when you think about fate, sometimes people wonder, okay, maybe I want to believe that I can change fate. How do I do that? Some people, if they understand that I have to be ethical, which means I have to try my best to make good choices, they understand that that's just all I have. So they think about fate and they think maybe that's not really something that I need to worry about too much. Sometimes they try to bypass it by thinking if I think literally about something, then will that help me understand why or why I cannot try to be a proactive agent in the world. So some people will wonder about the other side of that, which is what if fate is just what it is and I can't really do anything to change whatever it is that's destined for me in the future. This is a very difficult question to kind of think about if you haven't really thought about life and rebirth. So from what we've been talking about in the past, it's that looking back, for example, the past few lives that you've been living, you might be thinking, well, based on what my present life right now, maybe I've had a pretty good life because I'm getting a pretty good handle on how the universe is working. I'm still learning and I still want to learn more. There are some things I still don't understand because I'm looking for challenges in the world. But there's one thing that I really want to try to reach, which is um, I need to find a way to travel to a new country, for example. But every time I go to apply to for a passport, for example, there's always an obstacle, and I can't figure out what it is. So you might think there's a shortcut that I need to do. So you go and you talk to, sometimes you go to these government offices and they tell you, there's an application process. You're welcome to apply, but it turns out that you do have a passport. You're able to get it, but it's maybe the country that you're applying to that, for example, the visa that you're trying to apply for, just they always say, no, there's nothing available. Try again next year. Try again next year. And you're just like, my goodness, like what could possibly be going on? Like, is it the country that I'm going to? Is it the reason? So you're always revisiting your intention and you're just like, I don't know, man. Like, you get really tired, but you try to be patient and you're like, God, can you help me? Like, give me a sign. So then maybe a good idea is to think about that movie about Aladdin. I keep coming back to it, which is, okay, I'm not trying to take anybody's body or soul, so I'm not playing with the dead. I don't really think I'm going to try to like take away anybody's life, so I'm not going to try to kill anybody. And then I'm not trying to manipulate anybody. Like I just want to go for myself so I can learn. Because maybe I think that, the subject that I want to study or the population or the culture I want to study is in a different country. And I've only studied it as much as I can in the country that I'm living in because it's all about like reading it and reading about it. So now I want to go travel. So maybe what happens is that God is almost telling you, you will, but maybe there's something more that you have to learn. So you think, okay, well, I'll go back to what I understand about life. So maybe I have to think about, okay, I'll think about Khadija and Muhammad. So she used to think that if she's thinking about like kind of a playful way to think about somebody that she loves, God almost confirms what that is. So she might think, okay, maybe I need to find a way to like talk to God. And sometimes people say God won't forgive somebody until they are inspired to be forgiven. So it's like, I don't even understand how to do that. It's like, I'm asking to be forgiven. Like, God, can you forgive me? And sometimes that's what it is. It's almost like there has to be something that's missing and I have to keep puzzling it out. So it's almost like God's going to inspire me to be asking for forgiveness at a certain point of time. And in that way, it's almost saying that now God wants to forgive you. So it's like, so what direction is it going now? It's like, I don't know. So there are actual narrations where people will say, if you read this, you'll understand something about God. And so one narration says, where God is talking and he says, why didn't you come visit me? And then the person's like, God, like you're the Lord of the universe. How can I visit you? And he'll say, well, this person was sick. And if you had gone to visit them, you would have found me there. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. And then another narration says, this person passed away and his family was very sad. If you went to visit them, you would have found me there. It's like, oh my goodness. So it almost makes you wonder, it almost makes you almost feel like, so when people are sad, is it that, like, are there angels that are there that are helping? Because you almost think like, okay, angels are like part of like praising God or they're always remembering God. So then it's like, well then how is God there? Like I want to understand what this means. So then maybe you think, okay, well I'm gonna go back to what I remember of Muhammad and Khadija, where God's saying like, can you invite me into your relationship? And so it's almost like, well, how do I do that? Like how do I invite God in? So you think, well, what do angels do again? And then you're like, wait, Adam was saying that they glorify God, or they like almost magnify God's name as though to say God is so great. And then you think, well, what makes someone think that? So then that's when you go to like the really majestic things in life. So you can go to like the ocean, and if you're standing at the like the edge of the ocean and you just look out, and then you imagine in your mind like, whoa, this is really deep. Like if I was not to look back and I was like imagining that I'm on an island in the middle of the ocean, and then I like kind of zoom out like I'm going up into space, it would be like, wow, like it's just water. Like, and then you think God says that his throne is on water. So you're like, am I like around God? Like is God? So this is that feeling of like awe where you're almost quiet and you almost want to talk and you're just like, I just want to feel this feeling. So that's the feeling of wonder, where it's the complete opposite of what you would have thought. Because whenever people think of God, they almost don't know how to think. So when you read these narrations, it's almost like this almost confirms for me that the prophet did actually have an archangel that came to visit him and help him understand how to think about these things. Because our human imagination is very, very expansive, which means it can have a really, really, really um, almost limitless way of thinking, but we still need help, right? So it's almost like what I was talking about with relationships and communication. If you don't take the initiative of trying to talk to somebody to understand the way they think and all the things that they value, how are you supposed to know how to think about them? And that's basically God. He's trying to help us understand that I'm sending you the messenger angel to somebody who I love, who's Muhammad, who loves somebody who's Khadija, who loves him back. And so you see the narration of all this love. And God is saying, now, if you follow in this way and you love what I love, then obviously I'm going to love you and I'm going to inspire you. Now, think about that. You think, okay, well, there's two people that were mentioned that are kind of like sad or feeling sick or something. So, like, God, why does God feel like, how does God love people that are sick? Sometimes people think that when they're sick or they're sad, that God's punishing them. Now I have to rethink why I think that. Like, I don't think that might be entirely true. And then you think, okay, well, what happens when I'm sad or when I'm sick? And then you think that's usually when people just feel like they have those big questions, like, why is God doing this to me? So it's almost like God's inviting you to invite him in. It's almost like knock knock, and then the other person's like, who's there? It's almost like this playful way of God, like, come talk to me. So it's almost like when you think of people who are in these positions of power or wealth, and you think, wow, they must not have anything that they need. Like they have everything in life that they have like readily there. They can just buy it. They can just call a friend. They can just, do whatever they want. But then you understand maybe they're just so busy with what they have in life that they almost miss that chance to feel like, I want to feel that closeness. And how do I find it? And this is usually the way. So one of the things that we're reminded with the Pharaoh is that because he had all that power, some people say he actually never got sick. So that's almost what led him to believe that he must be God, because he never actually felt that feeling of sadness or that weakness that would actually help him think that there's actually something bigger than me here. So you can understand now why it's actually a mercy to be able to say that God's actually allowing me to feel these low moments in life where I can feel sad and almost not quite broken, but almost like I need this sadness so that I can remember that there's actually something out there that's some people call God, but this ultimate being that's almost like, why is it in these quiet moments that we remember God, or that we feel like we just almost want that kind of, it's almost like it is kind of like a warm blanket, and you can't really describe it other than that. So the reason I'm saying this is because when we do have these moments and we are grateful instead of being like questioning and like angry, then we can be grateful, and that will actually increase us so that we don't actually have to feel sick or feel sad or lose people we love, and have these moments of reverence. Because usually when we are sick and we're hurting like in some way, or our body's in pain, it's not a pleasant feeling. It's actually very difficult to find like a positive headspace anywhere, like to feel that gratitude or that reverence or that feeling of, I have to remember to be grateful. Because usually what's happening is your body is like, all I feel is pain, and your mind is wanting to be angry about it, but it can't really solve a problem when it's angry. It's just like, my body needs to heal somewhere, and I don't really know how to do anything other than just to either wait, because I'm sick, and sick usually means I have to take medication and wait for like 5 or 10 days until I feel better, and then I'm just sleeping basically. So remembering what we mentioned in the past is usually the best way to keep these moments of almost discomfort out of our life is when we are in moments of ease, is to remember God by trying to find all these almost like provocations of awe. So things that are just going to elicit that sense of awe and majesty from God's creation, and then bring that almost like it won't make you feel like wow, like I'm strong too. It'll actually bring you down and be like wow, like so. I've never actually been to a like an area in the world where there's really big mountains. Like you see them in movies, like Mount Everest. If you've seen Doctor Strange, or if you live in Canada and you live out west, we know like we've got the Rockies. So knowing this is like saying, I want to explore what it is that God has put in the earth that helps us remember that He exists and He's there to help us. And then by doing that, I don't really have to feel like if some traditions don't make sense to me or I don't really know how to think about something, that I'm stuck and I have to find somebody to help me. And then otherwise, I'm kind of just like, I have to give up hope. There's so many ways that we can find just these, even if you just find one narration and you just think about it for a long time about how does God talk about Himself, then just go with it and you'll feel that you'll have the inspiration and then you'll be able to kind of build on that. Just to kind of mention, I do have two kind of little booklets that I bought recently on Amazon, and they are the kind of like the most popular narrations that were collected after the passing of the prophet that kind of give like an introduction to what these kind of meanings can contain. One of them is called the 40 Hadith, which is kind of like a collection of the beginning ideas that can help you think about the world and oneness and the importance of having that reverence, and also God's mercy and the way God wants us to think about Him. These narrations are often between like a companion and asking a prophet something. There's other ones that are called like almost divine narrations, also 40 by the same author, Nawawi. But I think these ones are where God is actually sending the messenger and saying it to the prophet and say, so I think these ones are kind of initiated from God without actually having somebody ask from the companions about a question. So it's almost like God's almost willingly suggesting and saying, if one of you, like talking generally, like broadly to all humanity, wants to come close to me, then do so by doing extra charitable acts. And you will continue to do these extra charitable acts with yourself and with others until I love you. And when I love you, I will call the angels actually, and I'll say, I love so and so, so love this person. And we know that all angels do is love God. So if they find that, oh my God, there's somebody that loves God, let's go. And then you can imagine if you have all that light around you, it's going to be gentle and peaceful love. It's not going to be any of that bright, sudden love that's almost like, I don't know what to do with this, and then you kind of freeze. It'll be actually a reassuring kind of love that'll bring that kind of tranquility into your heart.